You're listening to Catholic Chicago. Ahead, the Archdiocese of Chicago brings you programs about the people, events, and issues that touch our lives. Welcome to Catholic Chicago.
Welcome to Beyond the Headlines. My name is Joyce DeRiga. I'm the editor of the Chicago Catholic, the newspaper for the Archdiocese of Chicago. And this is where we take a look and talk to people who are making the headlines in our newspaper. So today our guest is Dan Justman. He's from the Catholic Worker House, St. Francis Catholic Worker House in Uptown. They're doing, they've been for over almost 50 years next year. They've been doing wonderful work to those on the margins who are living in Uptown. So welcome, Dan.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. So maybe we should start out with, can you give a little, I know it's a big history, but a little understanding of what the Catholic worker movement is so people can kind of get the spirit of what you do at the house?
Yeah, I think the elevator speech for the Catholic worker movement is that we are people trying to put the corporeal acts of mercy as described in Matthew chapter 25 into direct service. So we're not exactly professionals. We're just people who believe strongly that, that which you do for the least of these brothers, you do for everyone. And to a large extent, that's really what the Catholic worker tradition has meant since the 1930s, when Dorothy Day and Peter Morin kind of founded the first Catholic worker and started putting that into practice. And so it's a tradition that we're carrying on here in Uptown.
And so next year you'll celebrate.
And so,
go ahead. Go.
What's that?
Finish. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, and so, I was going to say just to kind of enumerate the works of mercy. So we try to clothe the naked, feed the hungry, give drink to the thirsty, take care of the sick, visit the imprisoned, and the last one is bury the dead. We don't have to do that one very often, but it is on the list nonetheless.
Right. And we do that with, if you ever need it, I don't know if you know this, but Catholic Cemeteries has a ministry and a cooperation agreement with Cook County where they bury those who can't afford it, the indigent or the unknown. So if you ever need that service, it's out there. So can you explain to folks what exactly that you guys do in Uptown?
Yeah, of course. So the kind of programming, if you will, at Uptown, it has fluctuated over the years based on how many live-in workers we have. So right now, and as Joyce mentioned, for almost the past 50 years, we've had this house here in the Uptown neighborhood. And generally, there's always been some kind of live-in worker community. There was a period of time where there weren't actually any live-in workers. There was kind of like a supervisor worker outside the house, but the house was actually full of guests who essentially ran their own operations. But yeah, so sometimes there's only one or two workers. When I first moved in about 6 years ago, there was actually 6 workers and a live-in volunteer. And so our capacity, of course, fluctuates with, the number of people that are living here. But so right now it's myself and Danielle De La Pava, who is somebody who's been doing Catholic worker activities for the past 30 years or so, 25 or so years, I think, to be more specific. But so what the programming looks like now is on Mondays, we have an open community dinner. And so that's today. We open the doors at 5. We have coffee, tea, and other beverages. And then our guests start showing up. We always have dinner on the table by about 6 o'clock. And then it's almost, and then beyond that, it's kind of a social event for the folks that come. We service the tent encampment populations that are down Lawrence and Wilson Avenue most frequently. There's a lot of people that live over there that are regulars. They come every Monday. And then we're also open on Saturdays, and Saturdays we're open much longer, from about noon to 9. And then it's the same deal. We have food available. We offer our showers. We operate kind of just as a warming center. People can come and just have a place to sit. A lot of times, that's a way that I think about it is we are, holding this space so that people who don't have anywhere else to go can come here. And I think the repetition in our visitors is proof in the pudding that we're doing something right. It's really nice that they come by and we're able to build those kind of relationships with them. I know speaking for myself, I know that I appreciate the fact that I can walk around Uptown and I feel like, I do. I have lots of friends, and it's largely through the work that we do here.
Yeah, and I think people forget that for Uptown, the history, right? I understand. I used to live up near there, and so there were a lot of social services that were operated out of Uptown, right? So that's how they ended up with a lot of people in need. I know it's changed; it's kind of gentrifying, but there's still those encampments and stuff, and folks that need the shelters and need or don't want the shelter, but come and need the services.
Yeah, it has definitely changed. Even in, I've been living in Chicago off and on for about the past 8 years, and the change that Uptown's undergone in just those 8 years is pretty remarkable. It certainly there's pockets that are gentrifying very rapidly. And right, there used to be a lot of SROs. There's still an FQHC, but there used to be even more services. And so some are still hanging on, some not so much. But change is the only constant, and so we just try to roll with the punches.
Amen. And talk about you get a lot of food donated, like all your food is donated, and then you give it out, right?
Yeah, it's remarkable. So we get um, roughly 2 donations of food per week. Technically, one of the donations only comes every other week, but it's um, it's almost an incomprehensible amount. To a large extent, the food that we get donated, it comes from both a Trader Joe's and then a food pantry that works in operation with Amazon Fresh. And so, to a large extent, everything that we get is considered shrink by those grocery stores. They're not able to sell it. Maybe it's damaged. Maybe it's a day or two past the sell-by date. But that's almost all that we get. And, we're able to use that to feed the dozen people living in the house, as well as the 30 or 40 people that come every Monday and Saturday. And it's kind of remarkable as an illustration of what food waste can look like in,
Yeah.
kind of a profit-driven society like this, that we can get so much for free. And it's also just remarkable that, it's a remarkable gift that we're able to, redistribute, in our own way back to people who need it.
Hey, how do you? I meant to ask you this when we were doing our interview for the paper. How do you guys figure out what to cook? Like, do you guys were you into cooking before you came and joined the house, or is it based on whatever you get? Maybe that's the case.
There's definitely sliding scales to the cooking abilities. I am a big fan of making hot dogs because you just have to throw them in a kettle and boil them. Um, Gordon, actually, who we were mentioning just before. He's got his working career has largely been in cooking, and so he's a much finer chef than myself. So it, depends on two things. It depends on who's going to be doing the cooking and where their abilities lie. And then, as you just said, it depends on what we get.
Yeah.
I remember the first time that I ever came to a dinner here. Uh, the meal that was served was some kind of pasta bake with fried eggs on top of it.
Ah,
And so sometimes, we make creative things that are limited by what we've received. Sometimes we, can create actual dishes. But it's one of the things that kind of adds to the character of the house, and it's kind of the character of Catholic workers in general. A few months ago, we were at a gathering of the Midwest Catholic workers. There were, a couple dozen from Iowa, Indiana, Wisconsin, and we all met for this gathering, and we were all sharing similar memories. And somebody from one of the Indiana Catholic workers said, "When I came to the first dinner I came to, one of the dishes was a kale and peanut butter combination, which isn't what you would actually. That picture right there, that's from the gathering I'm talking about.
okay.
That's the Sugar Creek. Every September we have that in Sugar Creek, Iowa. Um, but yeah, so she mentioned this kale and peanut butter dish, and so it depends on what we get, and sometimes it leads to creative outcomes like that. And it's kind of fun, It's always edible. It's just
Sure.
creative.
Well, I love those cooking shows where they give them like obscure ingredients and they have to make something out of it. But yeah, so that's kind of what you guys do sometimes every week. Yeah. Can you?
Yeah.
We're gonna come up on a break in a minute, but would you talk about the Catholic workers, like that you're not a religious community, but you live among the people and you live in the similar circumstances. Can you explain that?
Yes. Well, so I think the religiosity of the workers living here, that's another sliding scale. Danielle describes himself as an Orthodox Catholic. I come more so from, I'm more inspired by a lot of Eastern thinkings, as well as, the political writings of Henry David Thoreau. Um, and so I think the motivations between the workers vary, but the outcome largely ends up being the same. And the idea is just that the word that's used in the Catholic worker universe is personalism, and personalism doesn't have a fixed definition, but largely it's about breaking down those barriers, mostly mental, between yourself and the marginalized communities. And that's something that's echoed in, Hinduism. In the Bhagavad Gita, we all have the Atman inside us, and that's our part of Krishna. But it's also something that's explicated in Matthew chapter 25, right? To repeat myself, that which you do for the least of these brothers. And so we we try to, I think, we try to just reduce those barriers, both physical and mental, so that the thing that is emphasized when we're all here and having our events is what we have in common, that we are all people, that we all have a place to stay, that we all, need food, need water, etc. And so, the motivations might vary, but the outcome largely ends up looking the same, which is that we're here to help the people who don't have anywhere else to go at this time.
Yeah, and I know when we were talking, I was kind of it was when we were doing the initial interview, that I had to shift my way of thinking too for to explain the Catholic worker movement. Okay, so the screen went blank. Dan went away. Oh, there he is. I think that means we have to take a
Oh,
break. All right, we'll be right back.
sounds good.
Thanks.
Caring adults make all the difference in the lives of adolescents. Catholic Charities understands this, and our mentorship programs provide a free opportunity for young adults to spend time with volunteers who genuinely care about them. This program is ideal for youth aged 9 through 12 who may need support navigating the challenges of childhood and early adolescence. Our amazing volunteers serve as friends who help youth recognize their strengths and empower them to reach their full potential. Catholic Charities conducts a thorough background check on every volunteer, and our program coordinator closely monitors and supports every relationship. Mentoring is a fun after-school program that can help young adults build confidence and enjoy fun activities with their peers, too. To learn more, visit CatholicCharities.net or call 312-655-7970 in Cook County and 847-782-4224 in Lake County. We're connecting youth with great role models. Join us today.
People always say, how can you spend your day with 3-year-olds? Seeing the changes that they go through and just the journey and how they grow, this is a very rewarding job. Even though at the end of the day, we're not the highest paid people on earth. And when I have a parent contact me and say, my child loves school, that to me, I'm setting that foundation for their love of learning. Because really, you are changing lives, you are molding lives.
Shape the next generation of leaders. Teach. Apply today at archchicago.org/schooljobs.
Welcome back to Beyond the Headlines. My name is Joyce DeRiga. I'm editor of the Chicago Catholic. And before we get back to our guest, Dan Justman, I want to give a shout out to the paper real quick. If you're watching on YouTube, you saw Brian pull up our web page. So you can find us at chicagocatholic.com. We come out about every 2 weeks. Subscriptions are about $30. They help support our ministry. You can sign up for a free e-newsletter that I send out about 3 times a week on the website. You can also follow us on social media. Some of the stories that we've got coming up are, we've got one of our Catholic-affiliated nonprofits who is working with different government entities to get work permits, expedited work permits for the migrants who've been arriving in Chicago. Also, there was recently a mass for healing for those suffering from addiction held at St. Linus Parish in Oak Lawn. And then we also have tips for enriching your Advent experience. And then always we have Cardinal Supich writing, and we cover stuff that's going on in Rome. So let's get back to our guest, Dan Justman from the St. Francis Catholic Worker House in Uptown, doing some neat stuff up there. So before we took the break, that was when we were doing the interview last week, we were talking about the structure. So I think it's maybe a little challenging for Catholics to understand the Catholic worker idea, because we're used to structure, like a lot of structure. And so it is more fluid, and that allows you to do more things, right, in an easier, maybe help people in an easier way. Now, you mentioned the quote, I'm going to botch it, but from Dorothy Day, like things happen when you're just sitting around a table talking, right? Did I get that right? Can you talk about that and how that feeds the spirit?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. This was actually one of the areas where I think I kind of had my point of view changed a lot earlier this year. During the first half of this year, I was actually out in Denver helping a woman sister on a coop, and she's a sister of Loretto, and she was running the Denver Catholic Worker for almost 40 years. I went out to help run a house of hospitality out there, and we talked a lot about what we were going to be able to do in the short time frame that we had. And I was envisioning it as trying to get some kind of structure set up that could be passed down. And ultimately, you know, what I realized was that the structure is nice, but what matters is the people. What matters is that you've got somebody like Anna Coop who wants to run a house of hospitality for 40 years. You know, what matters is that you've got, not to, uh, hmm, not to sound too egotistical or anything, but what matters is that you've got someone like myself and Danielle who want to live at the house and, you know, help run it.
Right.
And uh, so, you know, we've got structure, we've got rules, we've got expectations. But what's important is that we can also flex around those when the situation calls for it. You know, we've occasionally, one of our rules here is sobriety. We, you know, ask that our guests are always sober when they're in the house. We ask that our visitors, you know, are sober when they come for dinner. Well, you can imagine that people who are living on the margins can struggle with something like that.
Sure.
And so it's very, you know, it's very flexible if somebody comes back, how we can triage it in a way that it doesn't preclude them from receiving future services from us, you know? One of the things we talked about during the interview too was just our intake process on when we take guests in. And largely we take people at their word that the name they're giving us is even their name. You know, we don't ever ask to see ID. We don't have any paper applications. People show up, they ask for what they need, and if we have it, we give it to them, which, you know, is another thing from I don't remember what book exactly, but, you know, Jesus Christ says, ask and it shall be given, knock and the door shall be opened, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's another thing that we just try to put into practice. If we've got it, we'll give it to you. You just have to ask.
That's pretty amazing. Can you explain how you were talking about again, for the folks who are listening or watching, I interviewed Dan and Danielle about a week ago. So this is kind of come out of that. I like to sometimes do this, obviously the stories, the interviews, and then follow up with the podcast. But how you are able to, like, you also do things like you just basic, not services, but what people need. Can you give some examples of what people might need that you might, like you mentioned about maybe helping them get healthcare or get enrolled in something or such?
Yeah, definitely. So a couple of years ago when we did have more workers around, I was actually, you know, I was living here at the house and I was also working kind of in social services. I was working at the FQHC that's just around the corner, and that stands for Federally Qualified Health Center. So you know, essentially like a free clinic, right? And my job there was to help people apply for public benefits. Well, the crossover between the clientele at the clinic and the folks at the house, you know, if it was a Venn diagram, it'd be a circle, right? And so a lot of the skills that I learned at that job, I was able to bring here. And so I helped a lot of the workers and the guests at that time get connected to public benefits. I've done it, you know, I've been back at this house for about 3 months now. I've already done it with a couple of our other guests. And so that's a really easy thing to give. That's just information, right? And I have that, and it's nothing to help somebody do the application. But you know, the things that we can give away, it just depends on what we have around. You know, last week somebody of course was asking for blankets because the weather finally turned you know, cold for winter here. Well, we've been very fortunate to receive a bunch of blankets from the St. Harold's community. So now we have those to redistribute to the people that need them. Sometimes we have, you know, an example that happened about 2 months ago was one of our regular visitors had a place to live, but was in the process of being evicted and so was going to become homeless. They came by and they asked if we could do anything. Well, very fortunately, we had a tent in our garage that we weren't using for anything. And so, you know, it's almost like providential that this person should show up and say, well, I'm going to be homeless. And we can say, well, we've got a tent that we can give you. And I should clarify that, in many situations, like if someone were to say that, we would find space for them here. But
Sure.
with the number of people that we've got, we're at, capacity on that regard too, which is why we had to give him a tent instead of offering him a bed per se. But the point of it, though, of course, just being that he showed up, he asked for that, we had it, and we gave it to him. Um, and so that occurs many times per week, not with something as big as a tent, but people come by for groceries. Sometimes our dinner visitors, they can't stick around for dinner, but we can, fix up a hot plate and they can take it to go. And clothing, people show up, they need clothing, we get clothing donated, we sort it all into a closet, and we kind of just open the closet door and we let them shop through it and pick out what they think they'll actually wear. And you know so it really just depends on what we have available, and we do our best to keep things on hand that we know will be asked for a lot. We were fortunate enough to receive like an entire case of socks, which is like hundreds and hundreds of pairs of socks.
Wow.
Those are a hugely valued item for those experiencing homelessness, because they never really get an opportunity to clean them. So we've got fresh, clean ones that we can hand out to anybody who is in need when they come by.
You're aptly named with the St. Francis because I'm thinking of some of the Franciscans we know here in Chicago, and same kind of deal. They run like the Mission of Our Lady of the Angels in West Humboldt Park. They if someone needs something, they have it, they give it, and you don't have to be aligned with the Catholic worker movement. You don't have to like do what you and Danielle do, right? Like live in a house. You have, what did Danielle call them? I don't know if he said workers instead of volunteers. You have people that are associated with you around Chicago that come, right, and help come to the dinners and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's true. We are really fortunate right now that we've got about a half dozen very devoted volunteers, very devoted friends, I should say, who essentially are workers. It's just that they don't live at the house. But that's one thing we were talking about as well the other day, is that, uh, being a live-in worker is just a label, whereas, and this is maybe an illustration also of that point from Denver, right? Is that sure, you can put a label on anything, but what matters is the people, are the people actually going to do that kind of thing? And so, being a Catholic worker, you're correct. It doesn't mean that you live in a Catholic worker house. It just means that you, I think, kind of have that internalization of the works of mercy, and you just try to put them into practice whenever and wherever you can. I mean, there were a couple years in between my first stint here and when I went out to Denver where I wasn't living at a Catholic worker house, but helping people through self-sacrifice is something that I believe everybody should be doing and could be doing. And so, there's been lots of times during those years where I was making gifts to either houseless or marginalized people that, if I were to say it to like my friends who are not in the Catholic worker universe, if I were to say that I was giving that kind of stuff away to people, they would look at me like I was crazy, right? And maybe that's really the maybe that's really the definition of being a Catholic worker, is that
Just a
people
little
look at
bit
you like you
crazy.
might be crazy.
Yeah. All right, we've got about 18 seconds left. If you want to find out about the Catholic worker, tell me again, stfranciscatholicworker.com, right?
SFH, shoot, I really can't remember
Just
what our
Google
website
St.
is
Francis
called. I'm so
Catholic
sorry.
Worker. You'll find it.
If you Google Uptown Chicago Catholic Worker, you'll pull up our website.
Awesome. All right, Dan, I appreciate you being here and all the good work you all do in Uptown. And for those who tuned in or listening, thank you very much. Visit chicagocatholic.com, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for having me. Have a great day.
You too, Dan.